Do you remember that thing you loved when you were a younger gamer? It was the source of so many happy memories, and even to this day you wish you could experience those feelings again. Hi, I'm Calvin, and today we're going to talk about Spiritual Successors by casting an eye towards Empire Eternal. This isn't the first time I've mentioned Spiritual Successors on my channel, so I won't get too bogged down in the specifics, but instead give a quick overview. We generally apply the term to an unofficial sequel that arrives many years later, and we reserve its use for titles that successfully capture the spirit of the first game and provide a great deal of satisfaction and enjoyment for those who remember the original. Sometimes these games are created by the community, and other times they are the work of a studio whose owners have a real fondness for the project. These teams won't own the intellectual property, so names, trademarks and art styles will differ, and this is generally the difference between an official continuation and a spiritual successor. There are plenty of examples out there. From the strategy side of things, the first thing that comes to my mind are the descendants of Total Annihilation. First of all, you've got Supreme Commander, a game created by the same individual but working with a different team and featuring a different name. Following on from that, you've got Beyond All Reason, which is a community-created successor to Total Annihilation with additional influences from Supreme Commander. From outside of strategy, I think a great example would be Pillars of Eternity, being a successor to the 2D isometric party-based RPGs of Baldur's Gate and Icewind Dale. However, simply calling your game a spiritual successor is not enough. Game creators apply all sorts of labels to their own products, but the reality is that it's the intended audience that has the final say, and without their agreement, all of these labels are meaningless. The marketing material for Empire Earth 3 promised that it would take the series to the next level and be one of the most expansive strategy games for the PC. The players did not agree. There is no absolute arbiter of these things, but Spiritual Successor is the sort of title that can only really be granted by community consensus once the game has been released and evaluated. This leads me on to Empire Eternal, a PC strategy game that was announced in September of last year. It's described as the ultimate real-time strategy war game where all of human history is at your command. It promises the chance to create powerful empires across all eras on a scale never seen before. The Discord server states that it takes inspiration from games such as Age of Empires, Empire Earth, Civilization and Total War, although they are a bit more direct in some of their other social outlets. The first line on their Facebook page leaves no room for ambiguity and simply states, Empire Eternal is a game based on Empire Earth. This is all fine and dandy. It's good to let your audience know your intentions, and I think there's plenty of room in the current market for a modern version of Empire Earth. The problem is that some people have already started calling it the spiritual successor. This is far from ideal. Empire Eternal is a game that is very much in development. There is no public beta, no early access and no playable demo. Assigning such a lofty title to an incomplete project is asking for trouble and could place a huge amount of undue strain on the developer. Empire Earth means a lot of different things to a lot of different people, and making such a claim so early in the cycle risks raising expectations to levels that may not be achievable. You see, a game can live or die not just by the objective evaluation of the end result, but by the strength of the final product placed against expectations. This is why it's so hard to make a sequel to a genre-defining game, especially if that sequel arrives years or decades after the original. Before we press on, let's take a look at what we actually know about the gameplay of Empire Eternal. The Steam store page features some descriptive text. It talks about witnessing human evolution and an epic journey through history. It also promises a single-player campaign, competitive multiplayer modes, and powerful modding support. There's nothing wrong with any of this, but it's a very general overview that sets the scene but doesn't really give us an idea about how the average game will pan out. The Steam page also includes a launch video and some screenshots, but they don't really do much more than give us an impression of the art style. The video, which I've got on in the background right now, is pretty standard trailer fodder, which does the usual trick of showing us both everything and nothing at the same time. It all looks the part, but we've got no idea if anything we see is actually representative of the gameplay experience. They also have an official YouTube channel, which does include some additional videos, but these were all uploaded between 1 and 2 years ago. Most of these are art and asset tests for units and constructions for their new Unity-based game engine. There's no attempt to deceive or misrepresent, it's all very clearly labelled in the video description. The newer videos are a bit more interesting than the older ones. They do show some control, but it's very early stuff and there's only so much we can take from it. Once again, the video is very upfront about what it includes and clearly states that they do not currently have any systems for resource collection, pathfinding or combat. This is all good stuff. It's nice to see how the project is progressing and I like these sorts of windows into the whole process. The one thing I did pick up on is that units board a ship by physically walking onto the deck, something that was featured in Rise and Fall, Civilizations of War, and a feature I like the look of. And honestly, that's it. That's the absolute sum total of what we know about Empire Eternal. I'm not going to try and spend 10 minutes telling you about the gameplay experience of a game I've not played or experienced. I'll leave that up to some other YouTubers. Instead, let's take a more Caliban approach and dig a little deeper into the studio and publisher that have embarked on this project. The developer is listed as EPO Games, not someone I've heard of before. This company does not have any public information available, there isn't a corporate presence, and neither does it appear to have a LinkedIn page. There was a website registered in 2023, but the domain expired a few weeks ago and it hasn't been renewed. Their YouTube profile lists the base of operations as Brazil, so I did have a quick look to see if I could find some basic details listed via official sources. Unfortunately, the commercial registries in Brazil are all handled on a state-by-state basis, which puts them way out of the remit of my limited research skills. If I had to guess, I would say that EPO Games is probably an unincorporated business, something you might call a sole trader or a sole proprietor in your particular region. They don't appear to be linked to any other previous releases, so as organisations goes, I think it's safe to say that Empire Eternal is their first professional project. From a funding point of view, I did stumble upon a campaign from December 2022 on the Brazilian crowdfunding site Kick Ante. They were looking to raise 50,000 Brazilian real, about $8,500 to hire a development partner and create the game engine. If this sounds like an absurdly low figure to you, that's because it is. And if this was being handled professionally, you'd expect to see that figure rise by several orders of magnitude. No one in the comments is allowed to accuse them of trying to make a 4 million real game for 400,000 real, as I've already made that reference in a previous video. The campaign only raised about $25, so I think it's fair to assume that they weren't totally committed to this attempt, and it was probably initiated at the start of the project and abandoned shortly after. More recently, they have set up a Patreon, which appears to be bringing in something in the region of $300 a month. Not an insignificant amount of money, but still a few zeros short of hiring a full team. It is possible that development is being funded by the publisher, so let's take a quick look at Microprose. Back in the 80s and 90s, Microprose were an extremely well-regarded publisher of video games. They focused primarily on strategy and simulation, and as well as a whole bunch of combat flight sims, their early catalogue included such all-time greats as Civilization and XCOM. They would end up merging with Spectrum Holobyte in the mid to late 90s, but still be responsible for distributing some quality originals like Mech Commander and Transport Tycoon, as well as solid sequels in the Civ, Master of Orion and XCOM series. Unfortunately, things started to go downhill near the turn of the millennium. Microprose were bought by Hasbro Interactive in 1998, then Infogrames in 2001, and then Cybergun in 2007. Not heard of the last one? That's because they're an airsoft gun manufacturer, which makes this purchase all the more confusing. Anyway, by this point, all of the original creators and in-house development teams had moved on, and the brand would just end up fading into dormancy. The reason we've seen something of a revival over the last few years isn't because the company has mysteriously returned from the dead, but because the name and trademark has been purchased by an Australian entrepreneur called David Laggerty. He's into military simulation software in a big way and has always had a soft spot for Microprose games. It turns out he'd been quietly buying up old Microprose IP over the years until he had enough of the trademarks and back catalogue to completely revive the brand. What that means is the Microprose you see now is nothing to do with the Microprose you remember from the 80s and 90s. It's a completely different company ran by completely different people that happens to share a name and logo. This isn't necessarily a bad thing. The new incarnation of Microprose appears to be taking some interest in some long-neglected areas of strategy and simulation, focusing on the kind of niche that is normally overlooked by the bigger publishers. This is something we should applaud, and if you were to try and release a follow-up to a much-loved strategy game from decades past, then I think they're exactly the sort of publisher you would want involved. The question is, do we think that Microprose is likely to pay advances on royalties to an unincorporated business with no proven track record? There's no way for us to know. Personally, I think it's unlikely, but perhaps EPO Games really impressed Microprose with their pitch and they decided to take a gamble. My gut feeling is they probably have some sort of percentage-based deal instead, but it wouldn't be fair on either EPO or Microprose for me to speculate any further on this particular topic. So, with all this in mind, I would say that it's likely that EPO Games is probably a small team consisting of 1 or 2 key individuals with a little extra support in the wings. It's likely that they are self-financed and are donating a lot of their own time and money into the project. Again, this isn't necessarily a bad thing. We've seen some amazing games from solo developers and tiny teams over the years, and the right amount of skill, dedication, effort and creativity can really work wonders. What it does mean is we have to be careful about managing our own expectations. Creating real-time strategy games is a complex business, especially when something like Empire Earth is your primary inspiration. They've also placed the yardstick pretty high. Remember that they've promised the ultimate real-time strategy game on a scale never seen before, along with a single-player campaign, competitive multiplayer and full modding support. It's unlikely that they will be able to deliver on all of these goals in their initial release. I'm not saying that to be a negative, grumpy old man. I've examined the development of quite a few strategy games since I started this channel, and I would feel the same way with a fully funded project from an experienced development studio. I know this all sounds very ambitious, which is kind of appropriate if you think about the game that inspired them, but you won't reach the moon if you don't look up at the stars. One of the biggest challenges they will have to overcome is identifying exactly what aspects of Empire Earth they want to focus on. Empire Earth means different things to different people, and many of those who remember the game will probably have been kids or teenagers when they first experienced it. The youngest of those will have fond memories of rushing home from school, dreaming of a small unit of riflemen holding off hordes of Roman centurions, and then getting through the door, throwing down their Masters of the Universe lunchbox and running to their Packard Bell PC to make it all a reality. Those who are teenagers will think back to the epic multiplayer games, building a core base, creating gigantic armies and enacting set-piece battles that went long into the night. Others will have their memories firmly fixed on specific units, mechanics, customizations or mod making, and a few absolute diehards will be thinking of the battle that they only finished last week. Trying to satisfy all of those people is a mammoth task, not just because of the diversity of playstyles, but because those gamers aren't exactly the same people they were 20 years ago. They have jobs now and pets and families and responsibilities, and although many of them are still young at heart, their perception of the world around them will have changed. With enough time and money you can reliably recreate a game, but recreating a fond memory, that's no easy feat. So we shouldn't go around telling everyone we know that Empire Eternal is the new spiritual successor to Empire Earth. It's not fair on the people we talk to, and it's not fair on Empire Eternal. By doing so, we risk actively sabotaging the project. It's a small developer with a giant task, so the game might arrive with a lot of problems, or perhaps it will need to be released in stages. The developers might need to make many fixes and improvements post-launch, and with a small team this could take a great deal of time. By labelling it a spiritual successor, we front-load it with a lot of unrealistic expectations, and we risk generating a disappointing evaluation of the final release, based not on its own strengths and weaknesses, but on our own expectations. If you like the look of what EPO Games is doing, then tell your friends about Empire Eternal. Tell them it looks interesting and that you are looking forward to giving it a try, but don't label it a spiritual successor. If you're really excited by what you see and you've got a few extra dollars kicking around, then maybe support them on Patreon. Failing that, join their Discord, give them some encouraging words, and maybe one day they will release the game that we've all been waiting for, and it will be truly deserving of the title Spiritual Successor. And then come back to this video, post a comment telling me how I was wrong to be such a cautious and pedantic grumpy old man, but if that's the case I won't read it. I'll be too busy playing Empire Eternal. Hi there, thanks for taking the time to listen to me give Spiritual Successors a second outing. If you've enjoyed this video then click the like button, and if you've got anything to add then you can do so on the Discord or leave me a comment. And as usual, if you want more of this sort of thing then subscribe to my channel and I hope to see you back soon.